High is a thin, middle-aged man whose name is forgotten by most in the city's National Assembly building. Having worked as a janitor for more than 10 years, he has grown intimately familiar with the long, cold corridors bathed in harsh fluorescent lights. The daily clatter of high heels and the sharp, commanding voices of powerful politicians have become as routine to him as the pages of an old book, endlessly repeating the same lines. High lives in a small rented room, nestled in the heart of an aging working-class neighborhood. The room is worn, with peeling walls and patched-up windows. A rickety chair and a squeaky old fan are his closest companions. Yet, to High, this modest space is a sanctuary, a place where he can return after a long, tiring day to be with his wife and 2 young children. Every morning, when he wakes up, he is greeted by the sight of his family, a reminder of the life he worked so hard to provide for. At 5 a.m., the light in his room falls across his tired silhouette. With hands calloused from years of labor, he prepares lunchboxes for his children. He carefully wraps each portion of rice, fried eggs, and vegetables, knowing his children need all the strength they can get to face the day ahead at school. His job involves cleaning the entire National Assembly building, from the long corridors that stretch to the offices of powerful politicians and their secretaries. Every day, High pushes his old cleaning cart through the grand doors, bending down to pick up scraps of paper and wipe away shoe prints, some accidental, others deliberate. The people who pass by him rarely spare a glance. No one bothers to acknowledge his presence. High doesn't mind. He understands that his role is simply a means to an end, a way to earn enough to pay the rent, cover his children's school fees, and buy medicine for his wife, who suffers from a chronic illness. But not everyone leaves High in peace. Among those who make his life harder is Mrs. Min, a powerful female politician. Her small stature doesn't diminish the sharpness in her eyes or the authority in her voice. The office of Mrs. Min is one High dreads entering each day. It is the place he feels most diminished, most disrespected. There is hardly a day when Mrs. Min doesn't go out of her way to make things difficult for him. "What are these papers doing here? How are you going to clean them?" she demands. "This is too hard for you, isn't it?" On one occasion, as High began cleaning her office, she deliberately spilled coffee on the table, forcing him to clean it up while she sat, casually tapping her fingers on the table surface. High silently bows his head and quickly wipes away the stains. He doesn't want to cause trouble, even though, deep inside, a fire of frustration occasionally burns. There are moments when his spirit falters, when he feels the weight of the injustice. But High knows he must endure. He has no choice but to keep his head down. He thinks of the unpaid bills, the mounting pressure, and the hopeful faces of his children each morning before they go to school. They are his reason for enduring. High's days stretch from early morning until the streetlights flicker on at night. By the time he returns home, the fatigue in his heart feels heavier than the physical exhaustion in his body. It's the harsh words and disdainful looks from the day that linger in his mind. He wonders how long he can bear it. But High is not the type to give up. Despite everything, there remains a flicker of hope in his heart. He believes that as long as he works hard and remains patient, his life will not always be a series of bleak days. However, High has no way of knowing that a fateful night is approaching, one that will change everything. He doesn't yet understand the turn his life is about to take. That night, the moon is hidden, and the streetlights cast a weak, uneven glow over the empty streets. Darkness stretches out, patchy and uncertain. And in that darkness, High's life is about to be upended in ways he could never imagine. Hai had just finished his shift. His hands were still tired after a whole day of nonstop cleaning. As the last bus passed, he quietly walked down the road leading to the old house. The night wind was cold, but Hai barely noticed. His head was bowed, his thoughts consumed with unpaid bills, his child's worn-out backpack, and the medicine for his wife that he didn't have enough money to buy. Suddenly, an explosion shook the air, pulling Hai from his thoughts. He stopped in his tracks. Turning his head, he tried to focus on the sound. There, not far away, a column of black smoke rose into the sky. The sharp smell of burning gasoline began to fill the air. His heart raced. Without thinking, he ran toward the source of the smoke. When he arrived, he saw a car stuck in the middle of the road. The front was engulfed in flames, the fire licking the glossy paint, threatening to consume the entire vehicle. Hai shouted, asking if anyone was inside, but all he heard was the crackling of the flames in response. Then, through the thick smoke, he saw a figure behind the car's window, a woman, frantic, beating on the glass. Her faint screams were muffled by the thick barrier of the glass. Without hesitation, Hai rushed to the car, trying to open the door, but it was locked. His eyes scanned the surroundings and caught sight of a large stone by the side of the road. He grabbed it, lifting it above his head. The first hit didn't do anything, but the second time, the glass shattered, sending sharp fragments falling like rain. Reaching through the broken window, Hai pulled the door latch and flung it open. The woman inside screamed in panic, unable to unfasten her seatbelt. Hai bent down, ignoring the heat burning through his hands as he quickly unbuckled her seatbelt. With a final desperate tug, he pulled her out just in time. The fire was spreading quickly to the seat compartment. As they stumbled out of the car, both of them collapsed onto the street. Hai dragged her away, pushing her back against the sidewalk. It was then that he realized who she was, Mrs. Min Mai. Her hair, usually neatly tied in a bun, was messy, her face covered in dust and smoke. She was choking, her eyes wide with panic, and her teeth clenched in fear. But instead of thanking him, Mrs. Min looked up at Hai with fear and anger in her eyes. "What are you doing here?" she screamed in a shrill voice, choking on the smoke. Before Hai could answer, an explosion rang out behind them. The car turned into a blazing fireball, lighting up the dark night. The flash of light from the explosion highlighted the confusion on Hai's face, while the anger in Mrs. Min's eyes grew more intense. At that moment, Hai realized he was caught in an unexpected situation. Just a few minutes later, the distant sound of police sirens could be heard. Hai stood up, trying to calm Mrs. Min down. "I just wanted to help. You were trapped in the car," he pleaded, but his words were cut off by Mrs. Min's sharp voice. "Min-an, what did you do? You're the one who harmed me. You burned my car." She pointed a trembling finger directly at Hai, her eyes blazing with fury. Hai stood frozen, unable to believe what he was hearing. "No, I didn't do it. I saved you," he cried. But everything had happened so fast. The police arrived moments later. Mrs. Min continued to shout, spinning a story that completely contradicted the truth. She claimed that Hai had deliberately locked her in the car and set it on fire. Her burns and dirty clothes made her account seem convincing. Hai tried to explain himself, but no one would listen. Amidst the cries and accusations, a police officer approached him with a stern look. Without warning, he raised his hands, signaling Hai to stop. "I didn't do anything wrong. You have to believe me." Hai protested, but his words fell on deaf ears. In the blink of an eye, he was handcuffed, his face pressed to the ground, and shoved into the back of the police car. As the vehicle drove away, Hai could only look back at the charred remnants of the car and the cold, unforgiving face of Mrs. Min, the woman he had just saved. That night, Hai's life would change forever. He rushed into the fire to save others, only to find himself trapped in a nightmare. Instead of gratitude, he became a prisoner. Sitting in the back of a police car, his heart was filled with confusion and pain, wondering why this had happened to him and who would ever believe his side of the story. Inside a small, dimly lit cell, Hai sat quietly, the harsh light casting shadows on his gaunt face. The sound of metal chains clinking and the heavy clang of the prison door closing echoed in the cold space around him. He couldn't remember how he ended up here. All he knew was that after leaving the scene of the fire, everything had spiraled into a nightmare from which he couldn't escape. Every word he tried to explain was met with cold stares and harsh accusations. Ms. Min, the woman he had just saved, claimed that he had locked her in the car and intentionally set it on fire to kill her. Her sharp, cutting words felt like a knife twisting in his heart. How could the person whose life he had just risked his own to save turn around and accuse him so cruelly? At the police station, Hai was treated as a dangerous criminal. No one would listen to his side. They only cared about the testimony of someone with power and influence. The officer sneered at him. "You touch someone like Mrs. Min?" He scoffed, mocking Hai as he recorded his testimony. His tone was laced with contempt. Hai tried to remain calm, but inside, he was overwhelmed with helplessness and despair. "I didn't do anything wrong," Hai pleaded, his voice cracking with emotion. "I saved her. You have to believe me." His words seemed to disappear into the cold, indifferent air, dismissed by the prejudiced eyes around him. His plea was ignored, and he was quickly charged with attempted murder, despite being the one who had risked his life to save her. Now, he was facing a future locked away in a prison cell. Sitting huddled on the cold, hard floor, Hai clasped his hands together tightly. He thought of his family, his wife and 2 small children. What would become of them if he was taken away? He was the only breadwinner, the only one who provided for them. How could they survive without him? The first days in prison felt like an eternity. Time stretched endlessly, and Hai had never felt so isolated. No one came to visit him, no words of encouragement, no hope. The police didn't even bother to give him food or water. He was left hungry, thirsty, and alone. The thick stone walls of his cell felt like they were closing in on him, suffocating him. The fresh air of freedom seemed like a distant, impossible dream. Every night, Hai lay on the hard bed, staring up at the ceiling. His thoughts drifted to Ms. Min. Her eyes, there was no gratitude there, only hatred and malice. He couldn't understand why she would do this to him. Was her life really worth more than his? Was her arrogance and selfishness worth condemning an innocent man? Outside, the world kept turning, but no one, not even his colleagues, dared to speak out. Mrs. Min's powerful reputation made anyone who might have supported Hai too afraid to get involved. Even those who had once been friendly with him now kept their distance, fearful of being implicated in the scandal. The media quickly seized on the story. Articles were published calling Hai a dangerous man who had attacked and attempted to kill a famous politician. He was now seen as a criminal in the eyes of the public. Despite the lack of any real evidence, the accusations spread like wildfire, destroying his reputation and crushing his honor. But in the midst of this darkness, something unexpected happened. A video shot by a passerby surfaced online and began to spread across social media. The footage showed Hai rushing into the burning car, smashing the window, and pulling Ms. Min out with all his strength. The video clearly showed him risking his life to save her, a stark contrast to the story she had told. The truth, hidden for so long, was finally starting to surface. Min's near-death experience was so vivid that it became impossible to ignore. After being saved, Ms. Min immediately accused him, long before the police arrived. The video footage acted like a small spark in the darkness, gradually spreading the truth to the outside world. As the video circulated, those who watched it began to question who had actually saved her. Why was Min accused? Comments under the video expressed outrage, casting doubt on the validity of her accusations. As the video gained traction, many reshared the clip with the hashtag number #ThangKongL2, though unaware of the potential consequences, as it was a harmful move. Meanwhile, Hai sat in the cold cell, oblivious to the growing wave of public anger that was slowly building, a wave that would ultimately change his fate. A real storm was forming, but Hai remained unaware, trapped in despair. The video of An rushing in to save Mrs. Min from the burning car was spreading at lightning speed across social networks. Not only did it serve as crucial evidence proving Hai's innocence, but it also acted as a detonator for an unprecedented wave of justice. The first person to share the video was a student who had accidentally filmed the incident. The images of Hai breaking the car window, risking his own life to save Mrs. Min, and the shocked look on his face, quickly went viral. The outrage of his unjust arrest ignited the online community. Posts and comments flooded social media. "He's a hero. Why was he arrested? This legal system is broken. Where is the justice? Free him now." The movement quickly gained momentum, and Hai's case topped the trending charts on multiple platforms. Under intense public pressure, reporters began investigating and writing articles exposing the flaws in Ms. Min's accusations. Activists, social movements, lawyers, and human rights organizations rallied to Hai's side. A group of volunteer lawyers publicly demanded his release and held a press conference to present the truth. One of the lawyers declared, "This is not just a personal case. It's a symbol of the injustice in our legal system. We cannot allow an innocent person to fall victim to lies." Outside the police station, hundreds of people gathered, holding banners high. "Free Hai now," and "No justice, no peace." The protests quickly spread beyond the city, with supporters pouring in from nearby areas. The streets became filled with people demanding justice, forcing the police to block off the area around the station. Reporters scrambled to capture the scene of the growing protests, while some investigative journalists turned their focus to the woman who had made the serious accusations against Hai. Documents and witnesses began to surface, revealing troubling details about Ms. Min's past. The press uncovered a pattern of biased judgments, especially in cases involving disadvantaged groups. Her decisions often favored the wealthy and powerful, while disadvantaging the working class and people of color. There were even rumors that she had used her influence to suppress cases that benefited her family and friends. This revelation enraged the public even further. Major newspapers began calling for an independent investigation into Ms. Min, and the once esteemed judicial system she represented was now in crisis. The wave of anger had reached a boiling point, with public trust in her institution crumbling. Meanwhile, Hai sat in his cell, unaware of the growing storm outside. Suddenly, the door opened, and a policeman entered, his face serious but no longer cold. "Hai An, you're free to go." Hai's heart raced as he looked up. A mixture of hope and confusion filled his eyes. He was led out of the room and through a long hallway, where the lights flickered above, casting shadows on his calloused hands. When he finally stepped through the main door, he was stunned by the sight that greeted him. A massive crowd had gathered, waiting for his release. They clapped their hands and chanted his name. As he stepped out, the flashing lights from cameras and the determined faces around him felt like a dream. A lawyer approached him with a firm handshake. "Hello, Mr. Hai. I'm your lawyer today. You've been released. Thanks to video evidence and the pressure from the community, your case has reached a turning point. But remember, this is just the beginning. We'll fight until the end to get justice for you." Hai stood in the middle of the crowd, his throat tight, speechless. He never imagined that, as an anonymous cleaning worker, he would receive such overwhelming support. He tried to smile, but tears streamed down his face. Hai's story did not end with his release. The wave of calls for justice continued to grow, with human rights organizations speaking out and urging action. The reforms in the judicial system highlighted that Hai's case was just one example of the countless incidents where vulnerable people had been abused by those in power. The protests, which started in the city where Hai lived, spread to many other places. From a personal tragedy, Hai's story transformed into a symbol of the struggle for truth, fairness, and the rights of workers in society. Hai sat beside his family, his wife and 2 children close by. He knew the road ahead would still be filled with challenges, but he no longer felt alone. The community had stood by him, and he knew he would continue to fight, not only for himself, but for all the weak and abandoned people in society. On social media, the hashtag #STC continued to spread, symbolizing the fight for justice. The entire city held its breath, waiting for the final trial day. All eyes were on the courtroom. This was no longer just Hai's story. It had become a national symbol of justice, truth, and the fight against corruption. The authorities who had abused their power were now facing the consequences of their actions. Hai entered the courtroom with calm determination. His lawyer, who had worked tirelessly to expose the truth, stood beside him. The courtroom was filled with people, journalists, social activists, and ordinary citizens who stood by his side. Outside, hundreds of protesters gathered, holding banners calling for justice for Hai and punishment for Ms. Min. Ms. Min, who sat across from Hai, entered the courtroom with a tense expression, completely different from her usual arrogant demeanor. The pressure from public opinion and the overwhelming evidence made her no longer as confident as she had been before. The trial began with Hai's lawyer presenting the full story, starting with the video of Hai rescuing Ms. Min from the fire, followed by evidence of her false accusations against him. The video was shown on the big screen, and the entire courtroom fell silent. Each image of Hai rushing into the fire, breaking the car window, and pulling Ms. Min to safety served as a wordless condemnation of her actions. Then, witnesses stepped up one by one to testify, including individuals who had been unfairly treated by Ms. Min in the past. They recounted their experiences, exposing how she had abused her power to profit and oppress the weak. The climax of the trial came when Hai himself took the stand. His voice was low but firm as he recounted everything that had happened that fateful night. He didn't use flowery words, just the simple, powerful truth. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just trying to save your life," he said, causing the entire courtroom to fall into a deep silence. "But in return, you turned me into someone who deserves to be hated. Justice cannot be built on lies." After many hours of debate, the judge finally delivered the verdict. Finally, the entire courtroom held its breath as the verdict was read. After carefully considering all the evidence and testimony, the court concluded that the defendant was completely innocent. The plaintiff, Ms. Min, was found to have deliberately made false accusations to cover up her own abuse of power and profiteering. As a result, she would be prosecuted for slander and perjury. The room was silent as the weight of the decision sank in. But then, it happened. The room erupted into applause and cheers. Outside, the crowd of protesters also burst into joyous celebration. Two individuals, once seen as criminals, were now officially exonerated. This decision not only illustrated the power of justice, but also marked the end of Ms. Min's career. Her fall from grace was swift. Further investigations revealed numerous abuses of power and violations in her previous decisions. The case, influenced by her bias, was overturned. To ensure fairness for the victims, Kong Luan continued to speak out against Ms. Min, turning her into a symbol of the corruption that plagued the legal system. After the lockdown was lifted, Min was sentenced to prison, her reputation and power completely shattered. Once arrogant and untouchable, she now faced the consequences of her actions. Meanwhile, Hai, the man who had been wronged, was no longer an anonymous figure. His name became known to thousands who had been similarly abused, overlooked, and forgotten by society. Social organizations invited him to speak at events about justice and legal reform. Despite his humble and shy nature, Hai accepted these invitations. He realized that his story had grown beyond his own life. His journey was now part of a greater struggle, one that aimed to change the very system that had wronged him. Using his voice, Hai advocated for legal reforms to protect vulnerable individuals who lacked the means to defend themselves. Though he remained quiet and unassuming, Hai no longer allowed injustice to crush him. His story had sparked a movement. Human rights organizations, along with the government, began implementing stricter oversight measures on the powers of officials and judges, ensuring such abuses would not happen again. In Hai's city, an organization named Justice for All was established, inspired by his story. Its mission was to provide free legal aid to those suffering from societal injustice, especially the poor and working class. One afternoon, standing on the small balcony of his modest rented home, which had been slightly renovated with the help of the community, Hai looked out at the horizon. He felt a renewed sense of hope. Though the road ahead would still be difficult, he knew he was no longer alone. A small smile appeared on his lips. He turned back inside, where his wife and two children were laughing and playing together. From that moment on, Hai understood that his story would serve as a constant reminder. Justice may be slow, but it will always come when the truth is revealed.